designed to command, to control!
Not so fast, Jafar! Aren't you forgetting something?
How do you write a great villain ending? It comes down to a combination of a few things that we're obviously going to talk about in this video, but first I want to immediately answer the question of why. Why is it important to have a conclusion for these characters that truly stands out? Well, the most basic version of that answer is that it's satisfying. In most good stories, the villain is the embodiment of the main character's flaws, or at least serves as some kind of obstacle for the character. In The Dark Knight, Batman represents order, justice, and the good of humanity, whereas the Joker represents chaos and the idea that deep down, all people are as crazy as he is.
When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
In Star Wars, Luke is the embodiment of good, but has the flaws that could cause him to turn to the dark side. And Vader is the physical representation of that fear, highlighted by the fact that he's Luke's father and a Jedi who turned to the dark side. And when done right, the endings for these antagonists can provide satisfaction to the story and its themes and ideas. It also makes the characters themselves better, as having a truly fantastic ending makes them all the more memorable and helps them stand out. Now we'll talk about this more as we look at how to construct a great villain ending, as the why and how of this method are tied together. And while endings like that of Joker's and Vader's are iconic and do use what I'm about to go over, the greatest use of these methods and my personal favorite villain ending has to be Jafar's from the original Aladdin. Hi, welcome to Over Essay Films, where we make video essays on all of our favorite stories. And for this video, we're taking a look at Aladdin.
I think it's time to say goodbye to Prince Abubu.
The entirety of the film is really based around the idea of self-worth. How much do these characters value themselves, what do they value themselves as, and how do those perceptions change over the course of the film? Jafar's end perfectly caps off the film's representation of these ideas, but first we have to look at the character of the genie and Jasmine. These are two major supporting characters who are vital to Aladdin's change throughout the story. But they have their own arcs, and it's what makes them stand out compared to so many of the other Disney side characters. For centuries, the genie existed for only one purpose: to serve whoever gains control of the lamp.
You're a prisoner? It's all part and parcel the whole genie gig.
He's defined by the rules of the lamp and has no sense of value outside of that. But as the film progresses, he changes to be more than the three wishes he holds. He ends up becoming Aladdin's friend and mentor. And in the end, he's freed, finally allowing him to find his own worth and do what he wants in life.
I'm off to see the world!
Jasmine, on the other hand, is defined by the societal expectations of everyone around her, especially that of her father. He clearly means well, but doesn't actually understand the value Jasmine has as the leader of Agrabah. But by the end, she's able to show how competent and capable she is, and is given the throne of the kingdom. But it's with Jafar's ending that we get the true culmination of Aladdin's journey, and it showcases one of the main factors in creating a great villain conclusion. And that is thematic weight. These moments should mean more than just the idea that the bad guy loses. What does the bad guy losing actually mean for the characters and for the themes of the story? This is the first aspect of villain endings that Aladdin does incredibly well. For most of the film, Aladdin is just like Jafar in terms of how he views himself. He thinks he only has value due to his newfound status, and not giving it away and revealing the truth will make him lose all the self-worth that he's found.
No way! If Jasmine found out I was really some crummy street rat, she'd laugh at me.
A woman appreciates a man who can make her laugh.
And Jafar's obsession with being number one dictates his whole life and how he sees himself. The characters in the film, like the genie, try and talk Aladdin out of this sentiment, but Jafar ends up getting the lamp. Once he becomes as powerful as he does, Aladdin uses all of his skills in order to protect the people around him and fight Jafar. And they're all skills that he has because of his life as a thief.
I'm a street rat, remember? I'll improvise.
He's finally able to beat Jafar by tricking him by playing into his insecurities that he's still not powerful enough.
The genie has more power than you'll ever have! What?
Jafar is someone who only finds worth in being the most powerful and the most wealthy, but it's those desires that ultimately cause his demise. It perfectly concludes the film's central conflict and provides a satisfying conclusion to its themes. Aladdin is able to find worth in the person he is, and people around him accept him for it. Jafar couldn't change the way Aladdin did, and ultimately that's what caused his end. And in this way, Jafar's conclusion holds a lot of thematic significance for the themes of the film and Aladdin's progression throughout the course of it. Films like Black Panther, No Country for Old Men, and Oldboy all utilize this to perfection, having thematically rich endings to their antagonists. But it's really this next point that to me is what truly makes a villain ending something special. It's what takes great thematically appropriate endings and causes them to be satisfying in a way that leaves you completely fulfilled by the end. And that's irony or poetic justice. By definition, poetic justice is the deserving retribution for a character's actions. If a character does something awful, having something awful happen to them creates a sense of poetic justice, and that creates a sense of satisfaction for the audience. This also works in reverse. If a character does something good, rewarding them with good creates poetic justice. But in the context of the topic of the video, we only need to look at the first one. At face value, this is really simple, and applying a simplistic version of this can create something rewarding. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge is perfectly written and acted to be one of the most hateable antagonists in film, even more so than Voldemort himself. She's ultimately defeated when she's taken captive by centaurs in the Forbidden Forest. This moment is great and immensely satisfying because of just how terrible she's been throughout the film. However, it also could be a lot better. Throughout the film, there are various ways in which Umbridge torments the school, and her main conflict is defined by her relationship with the students and the other teachers. It's why moments like Fred and George wreaking havoc on her, or the various moments of rebellion in the book are so satisfying. In great uses of poetic justice, the character's retribution comes from the previously established characteristics. It should be something that ties to the character's actions and motivations throughout the story. Except instead of dealing out that pain to others, they're finally the ones who have to suffer from it. And because of that, Umbridge being taken by the centaurs is satisfying, but it also doesn't hit as hard as it could. While Umbridge has mentioned her hatred towards centaurs, her main role in the film ties to the people of Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic. A better use of poetic justice here would be the Ministry realizing how awful she's made things at Hogwarts, and forcing her to give back control to Dumbledore in a contract where she ends up writing with the same pen she used against Harry. Now this obviously wouldn't make sense or work for the story, but it's an example of how to use irony in a character conclusion. The scene we did get was great, but that's purely because the film does a fantastic job of setting up Umbridge as a truly hateable character. But it's Aladdin that has the best use of irony and poetic justice I've seen in regards to villain endings. Throughout the film, the only thing Jafar wants is to be the most powerful. This motivation to be number one drives every decision he makes in the film, but it's also what leads to his demise. At the end of the film, Aladdin makes Jafar realize that no matter what happens, he won't be the most powerful because the genie will always be stronger. Jafar realizes this and uses his last wish to turn into a genie, but he doesn't understand how restricting that power actually is. He gets stuck inside the lamp and is sent to the Cave of Wonders, the place where he betrayed Aladdin and caused him to end up getting the lamp in the first place.
10,000 years in a Cave of Wonders ought to chill him out.
This is a great use of poetic justice because his main desire, the thing he's wanted for the whole film, is what leads him to his failure. It's a perfect sense of irony. He finally gets what he wants, but blinded by that goal, fails to see how it actually destroys him. It utilizes the main aspects of the character to cause his ultimate end. More so than nearly anything, the use of poetic justice comes down to setup and payoff. If you set up any kind of act or special line on the part of the villain, having it be used against them in the end is immensely satisfying. It's why this line from The Order of the Phoenix works so well and hits so much harder than the scene itself.
I'm sorry, Professor. I must not tell lies.
To me, this idea of poetic justice is the most important takeaway from this video. Unlike thematic weight, which has to be the result of making a thematically compelling story, poetic justice is a great tool specific to villain endings. It doesn't require the rest of the film to work. You can do it by simply identifying whatever action or dialogue your antagonist has that makes them stand out, and use that to a satisfying effect in the end. However, it is important to note that while they might seem similar, thematic weight and poetic justice are different. And it's the use of both that creates something truly special. Thematic weight is satisfaction on, obviously, a thematic level. This means the villain end symbolizes the conclusion of the film's ideas and themes, or at least pushes them forward in some way. Poetic justice is satisfaction on a purely emotional level. It's about seeing characters get what they deserve in the most satisfying way possible. If that still doesn't make sense, look at it this way. Thematic weight is the themes represented by the villain's ending. whereas poetic justice is the satisfaction that comes from the specific lines or actions of that conclusion. For some other great examples of poetic justice, look at both, but especially the second ending of Thanos in Avengers Endgame, the ending of Governor Scott in RRR, or the ending of Barbossa in the first Pirates of the Caribbean. But there's one final tip to creating a satisfying conclusion to these characters. While it's admittedly simple and not as inherently interesting as the other two, it's something that a lot of films fail at. And that's quite simply how much these characters struggle. How much do they have to lose, fight, and ultimately overcome? Like I said, it's extremely simple, but it's also crucial to making the endings of the antagonists feel rewarding and earned. However, going a little deeper, to see how we actually do this, the most important thing is to stack the odds against our main characters. This creates an underdog type situation, and it's incredibly satisfying to see an underdog win. Doing this right creates a sense of desperation and hopelessness that makes it feel impossible to win. But that's still only part of it, as it's equally important to have these characters come back in a way that makes sense and feels earned. There's nothing worse than watching a movie where the main character suddenly gets a massive power boost or surge of energy, but it doesn't actually hit emotionally. In cases like this, it feels more like Deus Ex Machina, where their problems get solved in cheap, gimmicky ways. But Aladdin does all of this incredibly. As we see Jafar take control of the genie and use it to make himself incredibly powerful, it creates a deep sense of hopelessness because of the completely overwhelming odds. Throughout the entire finale of the film, we see him become the strongest sorcerer in the world.
Genie, my second wish. I wish to be the most powerful sorcerer in the world. Genie, stop.
Take control of Agrabah, imprison the Sultan and Jasmine, send Aladdin to the furthest corners of the world, and become a massive snake. We constantly see Aladdin barely escaping the situations Jafar puts him in, and every moment it seems like he might get a victory, he's immediately shut down. The more desperate the situation, the more it feels like the characters have to use everything they have, the more satisfying their victory becomes. In Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, Death is such a fantastic villain, in part because he never actually loses. He makes the decision to give up his chase after seeing how Puss has changed.
Here for an arrogant little legend who thought he was immortal. But I don't see him anymore.
It leads to a character who never feels demeaned or nerfed to fit the story. And Aladdin does something similar, as the characters don't beat Jafar in the typical sense. They physically cannot overpower him, and those level of insurmountable odds is something incredibly hard to achieve. Instead, they trick Jafar by playing into his worst flaws, and it provides a conclusion to the character that exemplifies all of his tendencies. Once again, it makes for a conclusion that doesn't need to make the villain weaker, and allows him to be at his most powerful, his most oppressive, but also his most insecure and vulnerable. And for other great examples of struggle, look at Viggo's end in the original John Wick, or Ozai's in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Most films use at least one of these ideas, but it's Aladdin's perfection on all three accounts that gives it, in my opinion, one of the greatest villain endings in all of film. If you guys like this video, I have a lot more essays on the channel, so check it out. And if you like what you see, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Over Essay Films.